Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. For this conversation, which was had in person during DICE, I had the great pleasure of chatting with Maggie Robertson, the actress you probably know as Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil 8 Village. She had an almost fairy tale adventure to landing that role, moving to Los Angeles, getting an audition, and immediately landing the part. It was a really wonderful story to have her walk me through. And then we got into broader conversations about the craft of acting and specifically, voiceover and performance capture and that sort of thing. And then zoomed out to a discussion about her overall welcoming embrace that she has received from the game industry and from the community of fans out there. The whole thing was very heartwarming and very fun. So I hope you enjoy it at least as much as I did, because I had a blast talking with her.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
All right, our second actor for the Game Maker Notebook podcast. This is very exciting. I didn't anticipate being the go-to, entry point for the actors on this show, but I love it. So, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
I am good. How are you?
We're at DICE.
We are at DICE.
That's rare.
Here we are.
We've had to do 2 years of these things remotely. It was always in person. That was kind of the rule. It was like, who do we know is going to be at DICE, or is going to be at GDC, or is going to be at E3 or whatever, and then we would coordinate the recordings.
Yeah.
And it was never even considered to do them remote until the pandemic asserted otherwise. So then we did like 20 in a row that were, through Zoom or whatever. And so it is so nice to be face to face.
It is so nice. I've done
to
a lot
meet you.
of these.
This is also a rare one for me. Normally I'm just geeking out with friends of mine in the composer world, and until 5 minutes ago we had never met. So I'm going to be basically just asking, getting to know you questions.
Sweet.
And assuming that anyone who listens to this later will find your answers as interesting as I
God.
undoubtedly will.
Now you've put the pressure on.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be soliciting a lot of feedback.
Okay.
I wanted to. There's a lot that I'm very curious about.
Okay.
But I want to start with. Let me back up. Often I do this semi-methodically, and I like to let people kind of give me their whole life story leading up to whatever we're going to end up invariably talking about. And a lot of things come up along the way that make me curious, and we kind of go down tangents and that sort of thing.
Cool.
And I am very curious to learn all about your background as a performer, as an actor, your relationship with games as a medium versus acting in other media. That's all very interesting to me. I know absolutely none of those things. I intentionally...
Oh, good.
I resisted the temptation to kind of internet stalk your background, because it's just, I don't know, more interesting to just kind of put it to you. But I want to start more recent. As a recent winner of... I assume a bunch of things, but particularly what I'm zeroing in on is what I refer to as the Keeleys, the Game Awards. I saw you win, and you said, "Thank you for taking a chance on me. This game changed my life." We're of course talking about Resident Evil, and that was interesting to me, the notion that it felt like they took a chance on you, because one of the things that's noteworthy about this industry is there's, especially in the world of acting, there's a kind of a cadre of folks that are very reliably going to always deliver. So they get a lot of work, because you just know, like Laura Bailey, who I think was the one literally who read your name. It was she and Ashley, I think.
I adore both of them. That was
Superhuman
so surreal
talents
for me, because I'm a fan of theirs. And then I was like, oh my gosh, you're handing me this award.
And it's a beautiful thing to witness,
Yeah.
because your reaction was so very authentic. It fairly came through. And I get the reference, because I don't know anything about acting. Part of my hope today is for you to give me a crash course.
Okay.
but I've seen them. Well, I've never watched Ashley work firsthand, but I've been working on some stuff with Laura.
But they're titans in the industry. They're in everything. Everyone knows their name. And you're right, it's so hard to break in. But then once you break in, if you can establish yourself as a name, then the work just comes and comes and comes. But that first step is always the hardest, I think.
It's the same with music. And I think probably for comparable reasons, because acting in games, and particularly if you're talking about performance capture, but even just pure voiceover, is a uniquely difficult challenge. And because not everybody can do it, you can have a brilliant, because I've done a lot of movies, and ADR is kind of a quasi-comparable activity. And I've gone and watched ADR sessions where I was like, I saw this actor on set and they were amazing. And then now, surrounded by RLX foam and with a mic and hearing a little like, count them in, and then they have to somehow get back to that place and recreate what they were doing. And it almost always butchers a performance. So you see a movie, and there's like this terrible line read. But if you can hear it often, you'll realize you can clearly hear this like a close mic. This was not on set. That was obviously added later because of wind noise or whatever. And it stacks the deck against them. And I realized that's the starting position for voiceover, especially in the world of games where half the time there's so little that's known. They're like, oh, your character is, don't worry about it, just read the lines. And I've seen it time and again, and it marveled. So it makes sense to me that there would be a few actors that once they've proven they can do it, they become this golden goose, this resource that the audio directors and casting directors say, like, we want them again. It's not because of necessarily the sort of Hollywood style, we want to rub shoulders with the glitterati. It's the idea that we've seen them deliver on a thing that is intrinsically, seemingly impossible already. And then add performance capture and it, now it's a whole other thing. And it is so
fast-paced. You just don't have time to do the whole wide search. You need to have someone right now, and the lines are changing every day, and you need to be able to have someone who can just step in and get it done super duper quick. And
exactly. So it makes sense to me that the Lauras and Ashleys and the Troys and those folks, they get a lot of work because they can handle that. And therefore would logically conclude that it would be very difficult for an actor to prove they can do that. So I wanted to just kind of throw a bunch of stuff, just sort of like vomit up a bunch of thoughts and then say, unpack that, particularly this idea that, they took a chance on you. It's such an endearing thing because you obviously deliver. I played that game in its entirety. And the character makes just such an impression. And so it's hard to put yourself in the position of thinking from a director's standpoint, like, is this going to work? I mean, is she going to be able to deliver this? Because all I saw was the end product. So just with that, we'll get to your background and all that later, but just.
I think that ties immediately into my background because I moved to Los Angeles in 2019 and I booked Resident Evil a few months after I moved to LA. So when I say they took a chance on me, I was unknown. I had no agent. I self-submitted for this project.
How'd you even hear about it? Usually
it was on one of the casting breakdown sites.
Did they say what it was, or was it just like
it was
game
a
company?
Completely fake breakdown. I thought it was just some like little itty bitty voiceover project, and I had just moved to LA, and I was like, oh well, I might as well give this a go. And then
where'd you move from?
Well, moved around a bit. Predominantly, I'm from Virginia. I was doing regional theater in the DC theater market. And then I had gone off to do my master's degree in classical acting at Lambda. So I was living in London. So I had effectively moved from London to LA. And that's how I got here today.
So what was that process then? I mean, like if you're especially not going through an agent and you're already, there's a lot of things that, especially
I was totally unknown. I mean, that's why they really did take a chance. As you're saying, it's kind of risky to bring in someone who's never worked in the industry before, doesn't really have a lot of credits to their name. I think I was very lucky that the character herself, in retrospect, it is funny because it does seem like all of my past experiences made me uniquely primed to step into this opportunity.
Such as what?
Well, they were looking, this is not a past experience, but they were looking for someone tall. Hi, that's me. I'm 6 feet tall.
You worked really hard for that,
I worked so hard for that. But so often
I don't often stare eye to eye with people in general, male or female. It's just typically, so I can see them lighting up with excitement. Like, I hope she can act.
Yeah. But so often it's the thing that rules me out of a part. So then to have a role like
Totally
this
get
come
that.
up where all of a sudden my height could be the thing that opens the door for me as opposed to closes it was so exciting. And she's very Shakespearean in nature in the way that she was written. She has a real love of language. And that was really fun for me because I come from a Shakespeare background and I come from a theater background. And so operating within worlds where the stakes are super heightened and super high, it felt very natural. It felt a lot like coming home. So stepping into the volume simultaneously was completely different than anything I'd ever done before, but also eerily familiar. It's very much like black box theater where you are completely reliant on your imagination in order to tell the story and to build this world. You don't have costume and makeup and hair and elaborate set pieces to tell the story for you. You only have your body. And if you don't invest in the world and endow it as real and feel it in your bones as real, it's not going to come through to the audience. It's not going to come through in the data. So I love that. I think that's
interesting.
Such
that
a
makes
challenge.
it sound like for you, it was actually considering I particularly like the black box theater kind of thread there because that suggests that it was actually much less of a leap for you than for them. Like this was actually, it could have been way more of a leap if it was like some crazy elaborate set or things that were requiring less of that imagination on your part. In other words, so that's a funny disconnect because they're looking at someone who's comparatively inexperienced in this and just seeing if in this specific aspect, the game and the motion capture and all that sort of thing.
But the theater work is so important because it's all about body work.
Yeah,
I had just been training extensively of how I can tell a very physical story with my body.
Yeah.
And that's all that performance capture is. So I think conversely, if you've just been on camera, doing work on camera, you can get stuck a little bit because you're operating within a very narrow frame. So I think it's probably easier for theater actors to step into the volume and kind of intrinsically intuit what needs to happen versus the other way around.
Yeah, it is
It's a full
interesting
body
how it's
experience.
Yeah, the world of performance capture, especially in a character like this, where so much of the performance is you as a player are interacting with your own way to a degree, like you're running away from her and dodging and hiding and doing all these things, and as opposed to a character who's primarily coming through in cutscenes, which is a lot more like film acting, right? Where it's blocked, it's staged in very sort of traditionally filmic ways. There's something about the indeterminacy of how the player will receive these lines that also puts it in a place that's totally unusual. But getting back to this notion of them sort of taking this chance, would it feel like an uphill battle to kind of win them over? Or was it kind of like it just sort of love at first sight, you all really connected, and then it dawned on you the degree that they were taking a chance? Like how much, I guess a better way to phrase this is, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, this is not meant to sound gossipy, but how much did the stakes of that come through to you? Did they shield you from that? Did they make it very clear to you, like they're putting a lot on your shoulders here? And
Oh, no, I was so clueless. My whole characterization of myself throughout this process was, "Buh?" That was just me, "Buh?" the whole time. Because I had no idea what I was auditioning for. And so I think, ironically, that really helped me because then the stakes weren't high for me. I had no idea of the scope of what I was trying to accomplish here. So I was able to just go into these auditions at face value, have fun, because the auditions felt very much like a theater audition. They had an open space and they were like, great, here's your space. We'd love for you to move around and feel free to use the space as you see fit.
Did the things they had you read have any relationship to it? Because sometimes they're made up material that's unrelated.
I think it was made up sides. I think the archetype of the character, it was the same, but the dialogue was different. The names were all different.
Right, okay. So you knew there was a sort of an inherently kind of menacing quality to her.
I knew that she was
packaged in
very
this-
arch and regal,
Yeah.
and there was some undercurrent of violence happening there.
Right.
So I was able to play and move around, and all that felt very normal. So I was able to walk in and be like, oh, I know how to do this. I've just been training for years and years and years on how to do this. I got this. And then you go and you leave it all on the table. And then I just walked away and was like, well, that was really fun. If nothing else, that was really fun. Left, forgot all about it. A month later or something like that, I get the call to do a callback. The callback was even more fun because that was more improv based, where they brought me in and they were like, okay, well, now you've got this whole new space and here are these objects and how would you do this? How would you walk around and do this? And again, that was just so similar to my theater background that I was like, ooh, character, body work, let's play, let's be wonky.
And they didn't clue you in anymore at that point. It was still, we are some random game. We might be a small one. We might be a big one.
Yeah, and I was so clueless to the industry anyway. If they were dropping hints like that, I was probably like, blah?
They were like, it's called Resident Evil.
I'm like,
yeah, that's too funny.
So, yeah, I think my cluelessness probably helped me a lot, but I do think Rosanna Sun, our producer, I think she probably fought for me a lot. I think she was very vocal from the beginning when she brought me on. She's like, we loved you. We really thought your work was great. And the whole team in general, when we got into the volume, they were so great about, nobody shamed me for it being my first time. They were like, oh my gosh, it's your first time. That's so cool. Here's this, this, and this. And just showed me the ropes. And it was really lovely. The cast as well was so lovely and welcoming.
I think that says that they're hidden in that is an implicit positive reflection on you, that you didn't hide the fact that it was your first time. I think I also live in LA, been there, I don't know, it's getting not far off from 20 years now. And there's a definite, I've always been an LA apologist. I don't buy the LA is a bunch of people who are full of shit kind of thing. To me, it's been not my experience at all. It is full of a lot of these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And
you have those people, but then you also have this. You have real people there too. You got to find them.
Well, and the thing is, those types don't tend to do that well because people see through them.
Yeah,
and
they're the loudest, but they don't ultimately.
And then usually, those that kind of have the goods from a talent perspective or whatever, tend to just let that speak for itself. They can't really help it. They're too focused on doing the work. Typically, there's always the occasional charlatan that really is legitimately that. But in my mind, in my experience at least, and it could be that my subjective experience has just been very lucky. But I know it has been very lucky. But it could be that those types have just somehow dodged my radar, generally speaking. But the reason I bring it up is because there is a real tendency. I understand rather the temptation to maximize one's seeming credibility, especially when you're walking into a space where you know there's a job on the line and I don't want some externality to make them think I can't do this. So how do I not put blood in the water in the form of my inexperience to kind of be the thing that's now distracting them,
Right.
So I understand why people will say things like, oh, well, I worked on this and that, because they were like an intern that day. Or like, I see this in composer territory all the time where somebody, like I remember when I was in school, the show Lost was in its waning days. And the composer of that show invited our class to all do an internship for a day where we got to work on like one cue from one episode and then come and conduct the orchestra in the recording session. And so it was like just a chance to kind of see how it's done. It was super controlled. They in no way put you in a position to like screw up, because these were real sessions for the real show.
Yeah.
And it was a thing Michael Giacchino very graciously offered to the school, and it was an amazing experience. Well, later I see some of my classmates like list Lost in their credits. And I'm like, yeah, okay, look, you were there that day when they were recording real cues, and like those cues probably did end up in the episode that you personally conducted. But let's not be unrealistic. That's not a credit of yours.
Let's not inflate.
You are
this
not
experience.
listed anywhere. The production has no clue who you are because we were guests of the composer. Like we were not even officially. This
and
was
that's
an
true.
intern.
If someone were to see that and call them up and be like, "Yo, I'm interviewing this dude. I heard he worked on your thing.
Yeah,
what's up?" They'd be like,
Yeah, it would take 1 second for that to backfire, and more often than not, it just, especially if you're like you see that credit and you see all these others that are nowhere near
on
that one, it's
yeah.
very clear something's weird there. If you have any sort of literacy in the industry, so. But I get it. I get why people think, well, look, I was in that room. I did that thing. It's the best sort of credit I could lay claim to. I can see it being like this, the one ring, just like talking to you going, and like just can't not do it. So because I've been around people like that where I'm like, it's not that they're fake. It's that they're afraid.
Yeah.
It says a lot about you that you were like, hey, this is my first time. Like I'm imagining you walking in the room with everybody.
Attention!
I've never done this.
I'm brand new.
Yeah.
I'm clueless.
How did you communicate that to them, though? Because if they were excited to walk you through it, you clearly did something really right. And I feel like that's rare. I'm dying to see how that happened.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very, very nice. I hope that it did come off that way instead of just being like this weird newbie, whatever. I don't know.
Well, you got the job.
I got the job. I did the job. It seemed to have turned out pretty well for me.
Did.
So there you go. But I think at the end of the day, yes, all of these outer trappings of the job were new, but at its core, it is acting, and acting is what I do know how to do. I can learn all of the different technical components of what needs to happen in the volume, but the root remains the same. And that was the thing that I walked in the room confident that I knew how to do. And so that's the thing that allowed me to not let fear hold me back. And I think you're right. There is that tendency to hide the things that you're insecure about. But I just knew that so much was new and different that if I were to try to cover that up and pretend like I knew what I was doing, even if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to do my best work, because I really needed to understand logistically what was required of me in the volume in order to make the best acting choices that I could make. So for me, it became paramount to do my best work, that I had to just be open and honest of like, hey, you asked me to do this. I don't understand why. I just need to understand the why, and then I can continue to make really relevant and intelligent choices here. So,
and presumably some of the things you asked about were things that someone would only ask if they'd literally never done this before.
Yeah, just little things. Like I remember in the ADR booth, they were having me do ADR for these longer scenes, and maybe I would say one line at the end, and it took me a minute because it was my first time where I was like, oh, you're not actually asking me to say the line. What you're actually asking me to do is to build the sound profile of the entire scene leading up into the line, of doing the breath work and being the vicious monster. All of that is a part of what is actually happening here, not just saying the line. So once I, just asking those little questions that are seemingly simple and obvious, but if you've never done it before, you're like, oh, I wait, I say my line, and da-da-da-da.
What was the scope of the job in the end when it was like in terms of just hours in the booth, how many sessions? And it's kind of just a boring question, but I'm curious because the character, was one of those where, again, as further context, I'm not a huge diehard for the Resident Evil games. It's like I'll play one and then I'll miss a few and then I'll play another. And a friend of mine worked on this one, and so I was keen to check it out when I heard that it was coming and it was a thing. But the thing that struck me was that before I even had a chance to see the trailer, I saw cosplayers of this character, and it's like the game had not come out yet. It was like the announcement trailer, and it was seemingly 24 hours later that I saw people cosplay. Because my girlfriend has, she's done a lot of cosplay in the past, and she half of the people she follows on Instagram are like all these insanely talented ones that are like the best of the best. And so even just looking over the shoulder at her feet, I was like, isn't that from a game that's like literally just announced? Yeah. It's not even out yet. And it blew my mind that a character grabbed a hold of the sort of community so instantaneously and in such a visceral way. And I want to walk through kind of your reaction to that and just the uniqueness of that. But before we get to that, the thing that then blew me away is when I played the game, I thought it was going to be like all about this character, building up. And then I was surprised when that turned out not to be the case. It's like kind of halfway through the game, it was like, okay, moving on. And spectacular kind of finale for this character, sort of dancing around spoilers, I guess. But I mean, at this point, you should have played the game. Come on. Fair enough. I don't know. I'm a bit. I'm always a bit.
I know it's good to be
stuff,
sensitive about it,
but yeah, I found myself thinking it's all the more impressive that this character has become like the face of this this title, considering that she's not as omnipresent as you would guess, given being the face.
Yeah.
And so that's why it led me to think, what was the scope? Because it could have been one of those where it's actually not, it wasn't like months and months and months of work, but maybe it was. I don't really know.
I was working on it for a total number of maybe 2 years, but it was very intermittent. I think I did a week of PCAP and then a lot of different voiceover sessions. Because you're right, I was not the big bad. And I think maybe that's another reason why they were willing to take a chance, quote unquote, on a new person, because I was not intended, I think, to be the main face. I think they realized as we were going on, there could be something crystallizing here, something exciting happening. And even Rosanna, our producer, when we were finishing up our last ADR session, she was like, I think the fans are really going to like this character, Mags. And I was like, sure, okay.
Did you have a sense to that end? I mean, when she mentioned something like the fans, I mean, if you said you didn't know anything about the industry, at some point you were told what the game is, and like you must have done your homework and realized this is a giant
never
franchise.
Explicitly told. I don't know if Resident Evil was ever said aloud, and I had to go home.
Am I breaking this news to you? Is this
what game?
Yeah,
what?
This is.
But I had to like go home and furiously research and do some investigative spy work and digging to figure out what game I was, because it wasn't until I got to the table read that I was like, something much bigger seems to be happening here than I thought, because people are like whispering in corners and being excited about things. And we got a huge NDA speech, and I was like, I think this might be a big deal, dude.
And it's funny because even in the world of games, you know, there's this constant conversation that happens about how film adaptations of games are just perpetually cursed to be mediocre. And now with the Uncharted movie coming out, that whole conversation is happening again. You know, people seem to be liking it. It's been successful, but there's also this question of like, you know, is it actually? I haven't seen it yet, but I keep seeing people I've seen it be a little bit polarizing with folks. Like I saw a tweet that was, they said the game's weaknesses were that they wanted to be films, and the film's weakness is that it wants to be a game, which I thought was an interesting takeaway. I love the Uncharted games, but I haven't seen the movie. But this is an interesting one where I don't think people consider the Resident Evil films to be like the high mark of cinema. But the funny thing is it's a wildly successful franchise because there's like 100 of those movies, and they keep making them, and they have this fan base. So clearly it's one of those that we easily forget about when we talk about the whole movies from games phenomenon, because they're not perceived, I guess, as prestige films. They're perceived as like films for normal people who just want to see a fun movie. And they apparently wildly deliver on that mark. And so you're stepping into a thing that's actually not just an acclaimed, like revered game franchise, but is also the kind of the secret, actual successful film franchise, which I don't know that I could name another one. I really don't know that there's another film full-on franchise with multiple films that spun off of a game that they just keep going.
I knew of the films first, I think, more than the game, because I was not a gamer growing up. So I had watched the movies, but then hadn't really realized the scope of the game franchise itself. So I guess I would agree with that. It's a big deal.
So how did they, like, when did that sort of settle in to as you were, like you said, at the table read is where you kind of started to get the sense that this is a much bigger thing than I thought. But, you know, when you talk about how empowering it was in the audition to not feel the pressure of that, clearly that must have started to change at some point then.
Yeah. I think the table read is when it started to shift. And then certainly once I got into the volume and you're daunted by all of the newness being thrown at you, and you're just hoping that you can still deliver on the product that you promised in the face of all of these new challenges and adjustments, I did feel the pressure, but I never expected her to blow up in the way that she did. My aim was not to make her this massive pop culture icon. I was just trying to be a good actor and not make a complete fool of myself in front of all of these new people that I was trying to make good impressions on.
Did they show you, how dialed in was the visual design of the actual character by the time you got started?
Pretty dialed in, and that was so helpful. I love the design of the character because I've said this before in interviews, but I'm going to say it again because if it ain't broke, why fix it? I love
and it's
her
new to
design.
Me. Like
it's
I said, I resisted the
you.
temptation to stalk you and listen to a bunch of interviews. So
Oh, good. Maybe it's new to somebody else too, but I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, huge nerd just in general.
Love it.
And so I watched The Mandalorian. I was watching the behind-the-scenes documentary about it, and I think Dallas Howard talked about how all of George Lucas's characters have a very distinct silhouette, so that you can see them from a distance, and already you know who they are, which character they are. And I think that Lady D's design, what Capcom does such a good job of, is making her visually incredibly interesting. She already tells a very clear visual story even before she opens her mouth. You look at her and you're smacked in the face with character. So for
100%.
me, the second I saw that image, I was like, okay, so many ideas. And so that was a huge jumping off point for me as an actor. And so I had that pretty early on to work off of. It was also helpful for me because it was my first time. We had, oh God, I'm going to fudge this up with all the terminology. We had
Watch that language.
oh fudge. Oh shoot, darn. We had those cameras where we could see kind of live renderings of us as
Like a previs.
Previs, thank you. That's the word. I know things. Previs. So I could kind of, in the downtime, I felt like I never turned off, even if I wasn't being utilized in the volume. I was always paying attention and listening to what they were doing with that other actor over there, so that by the time it came my time to be in the volume, I could take what they had done and kind of do something similar or learn how to do that myself. And so it was helpful for me in the downtime to be able to walk across the volume and play with how she moved and how that actually looked on the previs in their rendering. And
for the sake of those who are totally unfamiliar with this aspect of the business, you keep using this term, the volume. I'm assuming that's basically like the performance capture stage. Like,
yes.
And it would presumably be called that because it's very much about a three-dimensional capturing. It's not two-dimensionally purely about blocking on a flat plane.
Yeah, it's a big, wide open warehouse with cameras all around. And so for actors, for our references, we're acting in the round where the cameras could be anywhere and
Exactly.
we don't have to be just angled in a certain way.
Yeah, sort of targeting the folks in the back row.
Mm-hmm.
Was that done in LA? Or did you have to travel for that?
Yeah, LA.
Well, that's nice then.
Yeah, convenient for me.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Another aspect of this that I'm curious about is, I've composer friends that there've been plenty that started in film and TV that then make a kind of lateral move into games, and especially if they've been doing that for a long time, it's a non-trivial bit of whiplash to understand that it's not enough to say, it's like film, but it's interactive. I mean, the very nature of it being about designing systems, and that players are interacting with those systems, and that there can be emergent behaviors of those that the designers don't even know the full extent of, and all these kinds of things. Not every game has that quality, but it's a lot more than just saying, oh, well, it's musically choose your own adventure, more or less. Like it really can be so much more. And for some, that can be a real uphill battle to kind of wrap their brain around it, because the analogy I always make, or it's not an analogy, the description is that the linear passage of time is the single driving force underneath music as an art form. It's the thing that defines what music is. And it's the same with acting. Like, the words and the abstract are meaningless. It's how do you dole them out? What is the pacing? What is the shape and the musical sense that you're constructing? Do you start the line quiet and build to a thunderous thing, or do you smack it at the top and then in the aftershock of that, let it flow forward quietly? Or it's very musical in its conception, the way actors construct a performance.
Yes,
but it's
agree.
about time. It's about like, how do we make those seconds and minutes and hours relate to each other over time? And what makes games weird is that time then becomes non-linear. Like, the things that you're doing don't have the relationship of how you deliver these things is not the same as what the player experiencing them will have, potentially really, really different. So as a non-gamer, how much of this did they try to kind of explain? How much did you find yourself kind of, pushing into that? To what extent did it matter for the nature of this? Like, because sometimes maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think they definitely tried to give us any and all relevant character information. And you're right that there is a certain level of overload where in the moment, now retroactively, I'm very interested to learn more about exactly what goes on behind the scenes of why we do X, Y, Z. But in the moment when you're working, I did find that I had to be a bit more judicious of what is the information that I actually need to clog my brain with, and what is just going to be taking up extra space that I really need to have over here.
Makes total sense.
So there's lots of, so for instance, I don't know if I necessarily needed to understand the ins and outs of her blood disorder of how she became the monster that she is today. But what I really needed to understand was her relationships to the people around her, because that's what I base my acting choices off of. I needed to understand how she felt about Heisenberg when I'm in a scene with him, or her daughters, or Mother Miranda. What were those relationships? Because that's what makes up a person and what makes a scene dynamic. But yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying about music, especially I think Lady D as well. She's very Shakespearean. Shakespeare is so musically inclined, and I'm a singer, so that I think helps me a lot. And in ADR as well, it can be very musical where it's all about timing. And so I think if you have that music background, it's easier to step into those moments.
Timing and like how the energy rises
dynamics,
and falls.
Yeah, and you can really, that's craft right there. If you can learn how to sculpt every choice, every moment becomes a choice, and that is craft. That's the definition of craft, is being able to make those choices intelligently with reasons behind them. And Lady D does have such a love of language. It really allowed me to play and stretch it as far as I could go and play with vowels and consonants, and how can I weaponize language in this way for this character. So that's
a nice
cool
phrase. I mean, to what extent does that translate? Like, because, weaponizing language is one thing, but she is also, in very practical terms, a danger. You can't get close to her until you're ready. And so, did you do all of the performance capture for her? Or did they, like, even because she even has this very imposing walk cycle, you can kind of sneak around behind her and she'll just sort of be walking away from you. And is that all you, because sometimes there are situations where it's like, okay, there's almost like a stunt double who will do the more, it's probably unfair to call it rudimentary things that are, like walk cycles and things like that. But sometimes it's the actor who do literally all of it.
I don't recall fully. I feel like we had a couple of things where I would just walk around the stage, but I don't recall explicitly doing any of.
I asked simply because it would be, if you're unfamiliar with how any of this works, it would be probably strange to think, like, even just the concept of we need a walk cycle. You're like, I don't know what that is.
These are words that make sense separately, but you put them together. And
yeah,
now I don't
exactly.
know. Yeah,
and I could see how that would be a real hindrance on just trying to feel like I'm acting, because it's like, what? But to do what? But that's why it's because it's such a frontier. It is such a new domain for actors to play in and to find ways to tell stories and to bring characters to life where it's more than just the performance, because the player is involved and you don't know what the player is going to do, and it's going to be potentially years later.
Yeah.
So, how do you internalize that, and how do you?
It's also a unique experience because, yes, you've played this character, but you're right in that at a certain point, she's out of your control. I don't have full control over Lady Dimitrescu or how audiences use and engage with her. So audiences are really able to shape her and interact and create new things and continue to build and expand on her character and her persona. She does feel larger than just me or just this game. She's continuing to grow as fans continue to deepen their understanding and their relationship with her.
Let's go back to that.
She lives on. She is this living and breathing creature.
Every developer and game studio fantasizes that, some character in their game will be the next one of those, that just, the game industry from the start, whether you're talking about, Mario or Sonic, Link, Bowser, from the earliest days through to today, Solid Snake and onward it goes, the iconicness of a character is one of those extremely valuable things. And now and the funny thing is that now, because the sort of network of Comic Cons and things like that has become so robust, and pandemic notwithstanding, the cosplayability of a character is something they really think about. I have friends who work at CD Projekt Red and on games like The Witcher and stuff, where
love Witcher.
They have to think about that in advance, because they realize like their games have had such big responses in that way that there's kind of like, now we're looking to see what's the next thing you're going to make that we can cosplay. So they have to think like, okay, if we make this character this way, is it going to lend into that or not? And obviously they're always going to be very faithful to the story they're trying to tell regardless, but on some level there's a real keen awareness. And so I just wanted to circle back, since you talked about this was all very new to you. So it doesn't seem like it's a leap for me to say you'd probably never had people cosplaying a character you've portrayed before.
No.
But
that was on my actor bucket list, and now I can check it off. So that was cool.
It's not bad for my first
one.
gig out of
very
the gate.
Super casual.
I know.
NBD.
It's like David Arnold is a composer who he did a feature film that called The Young Americans in the early 90s that was based off of a school connection. And someone watched it and said, hey, I'm producing a movie and we liked your score. Would you like to do it? And they said yes. And that movie was Stargate. And then that led to them immediately teaming up again and doing Independence Day. So he was like a guy no one had ever heard of. And then suddenly these massive movies. And I always remember thinking, some people just truly seem to explode out of nowhere. Because most people, they come out of it. Like Jeff Beal is a friend of mine, the guy that scored House of Cards for Netflix. And he's like won many Emmys and been in TV. He did Monk. He's done a gazillion TV shows. Ooh. But like people kind of he was like an industry secret. It's like we all knew he was super talented and amazing, but the broader public didn't know. And then House of Cards kind of popped in a way that was beyond anything else he'd worked on, I think, even despite how well known some of the other shows were. And I was talking to his wife one day and I said, it must be fun to, after all these years, and he's even had, like I said, he's won multiple Emmys, and it still must be kind of fun to be, being discovered finally. And she goes, he's a 20-year overnight success.
Yep.
And I thought that was a really wonderful thing, because House of Cards was far from his first rodeo.
Right.
But in this case, it really kind of was your first rodeo, at least in games.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you said, acting was nothing new, but this type of acting. So anyway, I know it's like a weirdly indulgent question to just ask you about the relationship to that community reaction and fans and cosplayers and all that. But like, how have you even processed any of that?
Oh my gosh, it's been absolutely crazy. It's been so far above and beyond anything that I ever could have expected. I mean, let's go back. Let's review. I was the derpy girl who was like, boo-ba-doo-ba-doo, I'm just doing this game. Hope it comes out okay. Hope you like it. And then to blow up in this way was totally surreal. Also surreal because when she first started to go viral in January of 2021, I was still under NDA. So I couldn't say anything. I couldn't tell my friends, couldn't tell my mom.
That's such a classic.
So I'm just like creepily in the dark in my closet, like, just you wait, internet, you'll soon learn.
Jars of human heads around you, like, that's me, I promise.
Excellent. So that was pretty surreal in and of itself. And then
that is a unique thing to games. It's funny how Hollywood is all about like, hey, here's a napkin, I'm going to write a name on it. Now you've optioned my script. And it's like things go into the trades and then never get made. And it's super the opposite of the NDA sort of temperament of the game industry, where you can be attached to something for years, not breathe a word of it until it's like ship.
Yep.
I mean, how did you cope with that?
With difficulty. I was like jumping out of my skin. And also that's when the pressure really started to build, because... Did
you still have a lot to do from a performance-wise after that?
No, I think I was done by the time she went viral, which was great.
Yeah.
And there is also that kind of, because she doesn't look like me, there is that nice level of disconnect where I can really sit back and just enjoy her as a character and get wrapped up in the narrative myself as an audience member and a fan, and not have to be so overly critical of my own performance. She feels kind of separate from me in that way. So that's been really nice, actually.
Did you play through the game when it launched and or before that?
I have not personally played through the game because I would last 2 seconds, but I have watched other people.
That's why I was curious, because it's not, I mean, in the ranking of games from hardest to easiest, it's somewhere in the middle, but it's not, it's definitely not easy. Mm-hmm. And especially if you aren't fluent in those kinds of like first person, type games, she'll fuck you up good. She'll
real good.
It happened. It's funny because I was always a PC gamer growing up. So playing games on PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, where I have to use the sticks to navigate, has always been very difficult for me. So it's like I'm a pretty good gamer, but I still got my ass kicked repeatedly by her. And it was, you'd have those moments of like the genuine heart pounding of like, fuck, I gotta get out of here. It was
her
so
as
effective.
A stalker is such a great fit because she is so high status. The world operates on her schedule and not the other way around. So she's in no rush. She doesn't have to like work hard to catch you because she knows that there's no way you're getting out. And I just love that. That's part of what makes her so terrifying.
Was that a thing that they conceived of and wanted you to run with? Or was that something you were able to kind of inject into? Because you're right. Her pacing is never frantic or chaotic, or it is so... I love that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a total perfect distillation of the character, that she's in no rush because she kind of... It's like she doesn't take seriously...
she is at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, exactly.
So she has no predators. Yeah, she is the apex predator. Everyone else will die when they're supposed to die, when she is good and ready for them to die.
Yeah. How much of that was you, like, embodying that as a direction versus...
I don't know if that was ever an explicit conversation I had with Capcom. I think that was more intuited from the design of her that I saw, because she is so sensual and she's a big lady, and there are realistic logistical concerns where if you are 9'6", weighing X amount of pounds, however much she weighs, it takes a lot more effort to put one foot in front of the other.
Like a brachiosaurus.
Yeah, totally. So her rhythm, just because of that, was already going to be slower. So I had to be conscious of that. That was a conscious choice of adding more weight to each of my steps. She is this curvy, sensual person. So I felt like she's got that beautiful sweeping hat brim. So it just felt like everything needed to happen in a curve. Nothing should ever happen in a straight line for her. Nothing about her is a straight line. And you can see that in her language too, especially when she starts off. The language is more lavish, and she has these longer sentences, and she kind of winds her way around to get to the point, and has more archaic turns of phrase. And then by the time she's a monster, she's just lashing out, just animalistic rage, lots of slashing. So playing with those different rhythms of this idea of you can have an internal versus an external rhythm. Her external rhythm is very calm and smooth and fluid and flexible. And then internally, you have to feel that real potential for danger. And that comes as really quick, slashy, violent, aggressive, strong, rhythmic qualities. So to have those two things pushing up against each other, I think, is what gives her that element of danger that you never know really what she could do. She's controlled, but if you get on her bad side, she will be the first person to correct you.
Yeah.
And you needed to be able to feel that potential for danger.
Had you ever played a role that you could describe that way?
Well, she's very Shakespearean, and I had just done a fuck ton of Shakespeare. Can I say fuck? Great.
I already have several times.
Okay, good. I was
Don't worry.
okay, good. Yeah, I did a fuck ton of Shakespeare. So she was a natural fit for a lot of those character types, archetypes. And a lot of the roles that I play in Shakespeare are more of the Queen Margarets who have a lot of status. And I'm tall too, so I always play very high status.
But there is a difference though between the status kind of regalness on its own versus that being almost like a front for an animalistic power below. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's like a royal lion almost, where everything feels very deliberate, but there is this potential for total destruction, and it's not destruction by the stroke of a pen, the way, you know, a lot of, you know, the implications of the highborn Shakespearean, you know, like, I can have you killed. It's like, no, I will kill you. And I feel like that is a bit novel. And it's just always interesting, you know, just the whole conversations of typecasting and that kind of thing. And like you said, you being really tall. I remember an actor friend of mine once who's the opposite. He's, you know, for a guy, he's shorter than average. And we were talking about composers having to demo for jobs, which is very comparable to auditions for actors. And he was a producer / actor trying to get me to demo for his movie. And I was trying to figure out a way to just convince him to just offer me the job. And this was a long time ago, and in my naivete. And I remember he said, look, you just need to look at this from my point of view. He goes, and this guy's acted in a ton of stuff. And he's been around the block very much. And he goes, the number of times that I've been sent a script, and not in games, it's like movies and TV where they send you the script of the thing and you know what you're dealing with. It's not done in this abstracted way, the way like you had to deal with, which is much harder, I think. Or in a way, maybe this story makes it seem easier because he talked about how he invested, like a week into, I'm going to go in, I'm going to crush this audition. I've put a lot of thought into who this character is. He went and bought some shirt or whatever. Like he's put in the energy to really hone this. And it comes in, they go, wow, we love you. You are too short. Thanks. And he goes, that's just a fact of life for actors all the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, to me, there's something, you already mentioned this. I guess I'm retreading something you already mentioned about her height, your height being an asset here in a major way. But it's not just height, though. It's like there's a difference between tall, because there's like tall and lanky, like aspen tree type people. And then there's also just like gravitas.
Yeah.
And this character is
it's
so clearly
presence.
that.
It's not just the inches of height that you are. It's about the presence that you bring and the energy that you bring. I think high status characters they don't waste their energy. They're very efficient in their use of energy, whereas the low status characters are the ones that you see kind of fidgeting around and expelling all of this extraneous energy about, and it lowers their status as a result. So it's very interesting, I think, when you have a tall person who can play low status because you have these contrasting types at play that can actually really create an interesting character. Or if your friend who's below average height carries himself in a very high status way, that could be very interesting. And wouldn't you be more afraid of the short man who is so high status that becomes even more of a threat?
Sure,
that he's so unexpectedly that way. So I think high status characters have a relationship with stillness in a way that low status characters don't have.
It's funny because this is all so very intuitively true. These are not things that I really thought about before, but I think
it's not rocket science, but we process all of this.
Gloss over it. We take it for granted.
Yeah.
That's why I'm curious how much of this was written into the character, because they would have had to come to these same conclusions. But it really feels like, it feels so much like this is stuff you really brought. This is an understanding that you brought to the table.
I think so, and I think that's why I was hired. I don't know if we ever had these explicit conversations together, but sense. I'm sure that's why I was hired, because a lot of this is what I was already bringing into that initial audition. So
so then let's go back then, as I threatened you that I would.
Oh, God.
I want to know just where did you at what age did you kind of get the acting bug, as they say, and I'm curious also. It's completely unrelated to that, really, but knowing that you weren't really a gamer, what was your awareness of games?
Yeah, not a gamer. I did play Snood.
Okay.
So I played Snood, and I had the Lion King game. That was what I played.
Like the Super Nintendo game, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was
funny.
a leftover. Somebody left the console at some house that
it's a hot ticket item to just leave around.
Yeah, exactly. And it had exactly one game, and that was the game that I played.
That's so funny.
I'm gonna grab my chapstick.
Oh, no worries.
I'm dying. I am an addict.
You're in the desert, so.
I'm in the desert, but also I am an addict. Aquaphor, please sponsor me. I am the sole person that funds your entire business. Yes, what was your question?
So 2 questions. If I went back in time and I hunted down 2012 Maggie, 10 years ago, and said, what is your opinion of video games? Or what is your, I'm from another planet, explain video games to me. How on your radar was the industry, just conceptually, never mind through the lens of an actor?
I had a lot of friends growing up who were gamers, so I was aware of all of them, but I think my awareness of games was more of the shooter games. And now, having watched a ton of cutscenes, I love watching the cutscenes, and there seems to be more of a narrative focus now where you're getting to tell these stories and investigate these characters more than just killing bad guys and all that jazz. So I'm really interested in that. But that gets back to me as an actor. I'm interested in stories. I'm interested in characters. What makes people tick, and who are they, and how can we understand them? So a lot of these newer games, I'm super duper into them. Horizon Zero Dawn was so beautiful. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Watching that was
Hellblade to me is the kind of game that gives us little glimpses into what the art form really can be, because it can make a game that's really captivating as a gameplay experience, just the raw, completely irrespective of what they're actually saying. And what I loved was that it was such a tightly wound kind of exploration of a specific idea, this whole concept of it being really fundamentally about mental health, that they don't play that card in an obvious way at all. And like, it is obvious when you know what it is,
right?
But in a tasteful way, it's obvious. But it was
it
done in an organic
the
way.
Experience of feeling like you are experiencing this mental health issue in the same, along with the main character, which I thought was so beautiful. And my jaw was on the floor the entire time.
This is why it's funny how what you were saying about, games that are increasingly elaborate in their cutscenes and that sort of thing. My personal interest has migrated the opposite direction, where games that tell their story by handing me a controller and saying, you're going to step through this story. That's why for me, in The Last of Us, the big revelation is in this, this is a huge spoiler. So again, you had your chance too. But to me, the stroke of genius in that game, it's a immaculately, written and performed, and everything about it works so well. The environmental storytelling, I think, is incredible. Like, I love all the letters and the drawers and all that stuff. It's very, very powerful to me. But by far, the biggest thing that sells that game to me is that at the very end, when Joel goes into the surgery room and Ellie's on the table, the game basically all but breaks the fourth wall and makes you kill the doctor. It doesn't let you fire into the ceiling and scare them away. It doesn't let you run out the clock until guards come in and kill you and it resets and says, oh, try again. You didn't act fast enough. It's like, you must kill them because Joel must kill them. His arc was always going to be going in there, and if you could in my playthrough, I tried everything to not kill those doctors. I was like, they're not the bad guy here. I just, apparently, I was kind of like, I'm kind of torn on if I should even be taking her at all. But I recognized that this isn't my decision to make. It's Joel's. It just, the game needs me to inhabit his worldview for a moment.
Right.
And the way it does that is not by me watching him do it. It's by me being the one who pulls the trigger. And if you were to watch surveillance footage, it would be that he walked in and unhesitantly just killed them. But in my playthrough, it's like time stopped in a way that's not real, because it was like Naughty Dog was saying, take all the time you need, but there is only one path forward here, because that's this character. And to me, that's a form of storytelling that has no corollary in any other art form. It's an empathy machine. You must do what this character, who's not a blank canvas, they're not a Mario who has no inherent personality and is basically just kind of an avatar for your physical actions, and that's basically all there is to it. And nor is it a, like Mass Effect Commander Shepard, where you get to author all these details about that character from a grab bag of options and craft, their hair and their everything, their predisposition. Are they aggressive? Are they passive? Are they flirty? You get to choose all these little things from choosing from a million authored options. It's neither of those things. It's like, no, you don't actually get an option, but you still have to be the one to do it. And that, to me, that's why I love a game like BioShock, for example, where there's no cutscenes ever in that game. It's 100% driven by your gameplay, but it's still telling you a very authored story. Anyway, a little spiel, just my own excitement over the art form as just a nerd.
No, we love nerds. And I agree, that is so cool. It makes you culpable, and you're right, it is an empathy machine. It's very much my experience as an actor. That's what I love about acting, is that I get to step into these shoes and experience life from that perspective, and these games are forcing their players to do just that, and to step into these shoes and make decisions and live with the consequences. And
the power of that empathy, years ago, John Cusack made this little independent film called Grace Is Gone that came onto my radar because it made news in the composer circles, that a composer who was at the time totally unknown, now he's very well known, a guy named Max Richter, but he was totally unknown. He had basically done one significant credit, which was the Israel's submission to the foreign language Oscar category was this really forward-looking animated film called Waltz with Bashir, and he had written that score. And it made the rounds and was getting attention in industry circles. And this was like maybe 2007 or so. And then it was announced he was scoring this movie that John Cusack was producing, and it was a tiny little independent film. And then they fired the movie, premiered at Sundance, and then they got rid of him. And of all people, Clint Eastwood, who people don't realize is a composer as well, he used to score his own movies. This was the first time he'd ever scored a movie that he didn't also direct. So like Unforgiven, and he scored those movies. And and around that same time was that movie Gran Torino, which he also was, the score. And he would like work with his son and a few people to kind of help execute the score, but he would write these scores. And so this was the first time that he basically saw the movie and loved it, and then they had him rescore it. And I remember getting all bent out. It's like, so some unknown guy who this movie is like his ticket has been fired because they just wanted to be starfuckers for Clint Eastwood. And that was my perception, knowing nothing.
Yeah.
So then I saw that John Cusack who was also a producer on the film, was doing a screening and a Q&A. It was like a SAG, or it was like an all guild screening or whatever. So I went like ready to fucking raise my hand and be like, I have a question, sir, about your conduct with your post-production. And the movie blew me away. I was so moved by the end that I was like, I had no ill will in my body at all. And someone did actually bring up the question, and he made some interesting comments about what he thought hadn't worked about Max's score, and they couldn't figure it out. And then Clint Eastwood offered to do it essentially for free, and they realized, well, we weren't totally happy with it, and blah, blah. I can forgive all that. But here was the reason I'm telling the story, is because the premise of the movie, it's called Grace Is Gone, where Cusack plays this. It takes place like in 2001, shortly after September 11th and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And he plays this like super hardcore flag-waving Republican who is very, very pro-war. Like, let's go show them American exceptionalism, blah, blah, blah. But meanwhile, his wife is an actual like army, member of the military. So the opening of the film is he gets word she's just been killed in action. And he has these two little daughters. And he has this instant crisis of faith because this thing that he believed in down to his core has just robbed him of his wife, and he's totally unequipped as a father to tell his kids. So the entire movie is him continuously indulging everything they ask for as a way to avoid the question. So it's like they're road tripping to Disneyland and all this stuff because he has no clue. He realizes, I'm running out of time before I just can't hide from this truth anymore. And he does such a good job with it. And the movie, I just couldn't believe how much this movie affected me when I saw it. And, Cusack, if I remember correctly, at least, was like a lot of other Hollywood actors, pretty outspoken against the war, pretty outspoken liberal. And I remember he got up and someone asked him about playing this character and if he was hesitant at all. And he said, we forget how to empathize with people. We come to life from a very different point of view. He goes, it was a real honor to play this character and to really see the difficulties someone would have in this position of how do I reconcile this thing I really believe in a genuine way. It's not posturing. And yet it has inflicted a pain on me, the likes of which I've never felt before. And I will feel the rest of my life. And he said, that's a real thing, that there's a lot of people in this country right now that are dealing with this exact scenario. Because it was like this, we were actively at war, and like mostly the people that volunteer were, tended to be on the right side of the political spectrum. And so like the ones who believed in it the most were the ones who were also sacrificing the most.
Right.
And he was like, to inhabit that and play that. And he said, it made me a better person to play this character. He said, I'm still very against the war and my political beliefs are not necessarily changed, but I feel more well-rounded. And it was such an eye-opening perspective to realize just how powerful acting as a profession can be to bring forward character. Like, because when you said, the word that you said that got me on this was, you said, it makes you culpable. And it was like, wow, what a powerful way to think of it.
Oh, yeah. I love that you said that. I love this story. And I have always said from the get-go that doing acting, I could do a million other things. Everyone always tells you if you can do anything other than acting, do it, because acting is so hard. But in fact, the reason why I continue to choose acting repeatedly, and I've had many left turns and sidebars to this career, but I continue to come back to it, is because it is the hardest thing I could do. That you have to risk a lot in order to gain a lot. And it is so important. I do think it makes me a better person because you're always having to think outside of your own perspective and learn new things. I think you have to be very curious and open to new thoughts and ideas and experiences. And it's also why arts education is so important. Like, oh my gosh, can we get on a TED Talk PSA about this? Like, we need more acting and arts in schools because it's got to start that young. It is
I'm on the board of a K-5 music education nonprofit for that exact reason. Like, you're preaching to the choir in a big way. To me, that is how you fix the world.
It's a muscle, and we don't flex it enough. We're not teaching kids how to flex it. And
the downstream positive effects socially, and never mind that when brains are very much in their developmental stages, things that stimulate creativity and sort of thinking outside of the narrow confines of what's handed to them, essentially teaching kids to not color in the lines while their brain is developing, exponentially increases their capacity to be imaginative for the rest of their life and to think outside of
and those are skills you can use outside of acting. That's not just you can go off and do whatever you want to be with that skill set.
And the fullest truth of what you just said, it makes it so that you can go do whatever you want to do because your ability to learn new things is so much higher that it's like, if you don't have that, your just ability to learn new things in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s is just much smaller. So your opportunities are just going to be less.
Yeah.
That's why you see these, it's how many times you go to the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies or other, people that have just managed to be very successful one way or another. And it's so often a common thread where like, did you play an instrument growing up or did you do theater or whatever? And it's like, these are people who haven't acted in 30 years, but they're like, yeah, it's funny. I remember I was the lead in Oklahoma in high school or whatever. And it's like that shit. It's not that it's a one-to-one correlation that somehow, if you do that, you'll immediately become some success in an other unrelated industry later in life. But it opens your mind's ability to be whatever. You're preaching to the choir in a big way on that one. That's a great.
We are in agreement.
Yeah, no, for sure.
We're taking our stand.
Before we wrap up, we'll do this the backwards way, because that's a good segue. Did you have that as a kid, and what got you down this path that would lead to moving to LA and booking an audition and having a fairy tale outcome from there forward?
God, it really is so funny. I do think that I kind of tried very hard not to be an actor for a number of years, and I fell into it. It feels like a lot of my greatest successes have been kind of accidents, which is weird to think about. But yeah, I remember I always was very creative. I was an only child. And so I was just always hanging out by myself in my room and imagining these crazy worlds and just going on adventures. And so I think that's a huge part of why I chose to do what I do now. And I was a really avid reader. I've always loved being able to escape into other worlds and was super into sci-fi and fantasy. So that's always been my thing. And then I grew up kind of actually more interested in visual art and drawing, and I was always doing that. Drama really freaked me out. I did not like it. I did not want to do it. But then I also always think that the things that scare you the most are always going to be the most valuable and teach you the most. So ultimately, that's how I make all my decisions. Oh, is that scary? Do I not think I can do it? Great, let's give it a shot. Let's go. But in high school, I had a friend that wanted to audition for the school play and didn't want to audition alone. And so I was like, oh, fine, I will audition with you as a friend, but I'm not going to do the play. And then I got cast and she did not. LOL. And then the rest is history.
That's so funny.
So I kind of fell into it. But the reason why, I think when I did acting in high school, I did it more as a social activity because I really liked the people that I was working with. And theater in particular, what I love about theater is getting to work collaboratively with other people as an ensemble and working together to build something. That kind of work is really exciting when you can bounce ideas off of someone and really see the tangible work that you're putting out there come to be. So that was high school. And then I did acting in college. I think when I decided to go to college and I decided to do theater, I was like, well, I don't have anything better that I like to do. I always had a lot of different interests and then I couldn't decide on just one. And I kind of resented the fact that I would have to eventually just pick one thing. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized that acting, in fact, actually allowed me to do it all because it is so interdisciplinary. It's English, it's music, it's psychology, it's politics, it's all of this stuff, it's sociology. So I was able to combine all of my interest into this one thing. And that's when I started to get serious about acting, because I realized that it was work and it was challenging. It was stimulating me on every level. I think I'm one of those people that if it's not challenging, then I get bored and then I don't want to do it. So this was insanely challenging, and it was stimulating me mentally, physically, emotionally. So I just got super jazzed about it. And that was, I think, the first time I started to actually consider myself an actor. In high school, it was just fun.
Yeah.
In college, it became something I could see myself doing as a career.
Well, you've put a major shot across the bow with this gig, and I can only hope that it has already catalyzed more opportunities. I'll just end with the other thing that you had said that I really resonated with at the Game Awards was how welcomed you immediately felt into the community of games, especially knowing that for the actors, like you said, it's a fairly tight-knit group of a dozen or however many that are kind of really consistently dominating those calls that go out. And even if with really good reason, it can be like a wall that you're staring at. How do I like the opening of Look Who's Talking? And the fact that your sentiment was that you kind of stepped into this place that was excited you were there, impressed by what you had done, and was, very much welcoming you. I've always felt the same, and I always have this voice in the back of my head going, am I just some naive idealist? And in reality, either that's just not true, or like I was unusually lucky or whatever. So it always means a lot to see somebody say they felt the
unusually lucky trap, I think, can be a trap, because then I think it negates all of the work that you did to get to this point, or all of the real things based in this luck. I think it can be very lucky, but also true. I think that that's just a mark of you're exactly where you meant to be. That's how I felt about it. I got very lucky, but I'm exactly where I meant to be, and that's why all of these doors seem to be opening. I'm right in the channel. I'm right in the flow, man.
Well,
so I think you must be right in the flow. You found the good people, and going steady.
Present
from there.
company included. Thanks for doing this. This was really this was awesome. So let's go enjoy the rest of
Awesome
Dice.
chatting with you. It was super fun. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Me being a little derpy derp.
I'm sure they did.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.